when are people going to realise that full socialism doesn't work? It goes against human nature. People just haven't thought things through. There was an experiment where students at university were asked would they all like to get the same mark for an assignment because that was socialism. And they said yes. So in the first assignment, you had very good students, you had above average students, you had average students and fail students. And what happened was the mark was B, which is kind of credit above average. The bright kids said, well, what's the use of working hard if I don't get an A? A distinction. So for the next assignment, they didn't work as hard, and the mark in total went down to a C. Then the B and the A kids, credit and distinction kids, thought, well, why should I try really hard except just do the basics because we only got a C last time? So that's all they did. And of course, the C kids decided not to work too hard either. And their next mark was, for the third assignment, was an F. That's what happens with socialism. Unfortunately, money is a motivator. Money tells you whether you're doing the most profitable thing, money-wise and in other ways. Now, when people are prompted to think and given a bit of information, they would know that there's a lot of freeloaders. They would know that people are made up of good and bad. They would know that all you can be concerned about is a maximum of 150 people. And anything higher, people are just numbers. As well, the famous experiment with giving people shocks up to a very high level when they got answers wrong indicates that people aren't that kind. Under certain circumstances, they can be extremely cruel, thus the Nazis. Thus other groups that persecuted people, including the Japanese, including just about any nationality that's attacked anyone else. People are good and bad. Now, the family has to work on a communist or socialistic basis because it has to be according to people's needs for most people in the family rather than their contribution. We can't expect a week-old baby to do anything except be a baby. We can expect a bit more of a 7-year-old. They can clean up and do some washing up and maybe drying up. But we can't expect a 7-year-old to do the work of a fully grown adult mentally or physically or even emotionally. So the home, the family, has to work on a social or socialism model. But that can't be translated to a nation or to a large society. Maybe a small village, yes. But even then there's problems. But people need to get something in return for their effort. And they need to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and shelter themselves. And other people aren't going to do this for them just because it's a good idea or just to be nice. A few people might, but most people won't. People ask, what's in it for me? Even the dedicated, altruistic people ask that. And people have got to survive. Money or profit tells people whether what they're doing has value. The other thing is, and I hadn't thought about this myself, but it's so obvious. If you go from capitalism, greedy capitalists, selfish capitalists in a society, I'm just calling them that, to socialism where the government owns everything, you're not going to change those people who have been greedy capitalists. People don't change that quickly unless there's a huge incentive. So the Russians and others thought you could change people to some extent by the system, and that isn't unworthy, but you can't. Not very much anyhow. Animal Farm showed what happens when socialism is practiced. A good example where people's natures don't change is also a Greek play. I forget the title. The Assembly of Women, it could be, but I'm not quite sure. Every form of government had been tried in Athens. In this play, it's a comedy. Rule of the despot, rule of the rich, rule of the men, you name it. Every form of government people could think of. And then they decided to give the women the power, be the government in Athens. And this is a comedy. Because they thought women were into harmony, they were into helping people, just like they help people in the family, and society would be much less selfish, more humane, relationships would be greater, there'd be no wars. But in actual fact, when the women came to make the laws, and remembering once again this is a comedy, the first law was the very handsome men have to take out the average or below average women in appearance before they can take out the beautiful women. Showing that it's very difficult to change people's inclinations, instincts, natures, whatever you like to call it. Now, we do need some socialism. Some services people are not going to get into, or they're just not going to work well when they're owned by private individuals. Education's a good one. Doesn't work too well privately. Health is another one. Really doesn't work too well privately. Just look at the American system. Very expensive. People left behind. The top people get very good treatment, but the poor not so good treatment, and the government has to institute a program to help the elderly and the poor anyhow. So the system has to be propped up with a form of socialism. Medicare, Medicaid, I just forget all the titles. It doesn't matter, I'm talking about principles. So people that advocate socialism, like, or vote for it, like the women did between 18 and 29 for the New York mayor, they're voting on a fantasy. They're voting on a romanticized, idealistic, utopian view of society. Free transport, tax the rich over a certain level. All these implications are not thought through. You can't just have free transport. It's got to be financed somehow. And if you tax the rich in New York excessively, they're going to leave. So you've got to think of all those things, and you've got to think not all rich people are evil, not all poor people are good. But people don't seem to think through that. We've got a society where too many people think victims are heroes and heroes are nasty people. It's a strange situation. Very strange. So yes, some socialism, a mixed economy, maybe 20% of things have to be run by the government because private enterprise, which is governed by profit, can't provide a good service, and taxes have got to guarantee good service in education, welfare, education, and other areas. Socialism hasn't worked in any country. Occasionally you get a very good aspect in a socialist or communist country. Health in Cuba, rockets in Russia. But when the most efficient societies like China and East Germany, or the potential because that's the nature of the people, can't make it work, then what chance have African countries got? What chance have average countries in terms of work ethic like India? What chance have they got? It just doesn't work. Thank you.